Okay, so you've brought us some really fascinating sources today, all centered around this paper, The Legacy of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati,
Hmm.
Fact, Fiction, and Historical Impact.
That's the one.
And, I mean, for anyone interested in secret societies or just how history gets twisted into myth, well, this is perfect territory for a deep dive.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the Illuminati.
Yeah.
And just saying the name,
Mm.
it brings up all these images, right?
Mhm.
Shadowy figures, global plots.
It really does. The name itself carries so much weight, so much cultural baggage. But, most of it, almost all of it, is built on legend.
Right.
The actual group, the historical one you find in the documents, it's a much smaller story, very specific to its time and place.
And that's exactly what we want to do today. Let's unpack these sources, try to cut through all that myths and conspiracy, and really get to the core historical reality. What was this group actually about? How did this, well, small group of Enlightenment thinkers in Bavaria become this global symbol of hidden control? And what does the actual history tell us, maybe compared to the stories we think we know?
Okay, let's dive in. So picture this. Bavaria, 1776.
Right in the middle of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason.
Exactly. A time of huge intellectual shifts. You've got new ideas about science, reason, individual rights, and a growing skepticism about traditional authority, especially the church and the monarchy.
Big ideas were definitely in the air.
They were, but Bavaria itself, very conservative, hugely conservative, actually. The Catholic Church had immense power, politically, culturally. It was deeply intertwined with the state, and they were pushing back hard against these new progressive Enlightenment ideals.
So we've got this real tension, this friction, and into this mix steps Adam Weishaupt.
Adam Weishaupt, yeah, born 1748, orphaned young. He was raised by his godfather, Johann Adam von Eichstätt, who was actually a big proponent of Enlightenment thinking.
Oh, interesting connection there.
Yeah. And Weishaupt eventually becomes a professor at the University of Ingolstadt, teaching canon law. So basically the church's legal system.
Wow, teaching the rules of the very system he was starting to question.
Exactly. He became really profoundly frustrated by the conservative grip on everything, the church's dominance. He felt society was just stifled by superstition, by a lack of critical thinking.
That does sound like fertile ground for starting something.
Yay.
Secret.
It really was. And that frustration led him directly to found the Order of the Illuminati, May 1st, 1776.
Okay, and what was the goal? Was it world domination from the start?
Not according to their own writings, no. His stated goal was specific: create a secret society to actively push Enlightenment ideals, things like rationality, freedom of thought, getting people away from superstition and dogma.
So the secrecy wasn't just for show, it was practical.
Oh, absolutely practical. Given the politics, the religious climate in Bavaria, trying to push these ideas openly would have been impossible. Suicidal, probably.
Right.
So he envisioned this network. Like-minded people, progressive thinkers who could subtly influence things from the inside academia, government, maybe even the church itself eventually.
Okay. And he wanted it purely rational, you said, unlike, say, the Freemasons.
Yeah, that's a key point. He knew about Freemasonry, but he found it, well, too caught up in rituals and symbolism that he thought were mystical, not rational. He wanted pure reason.
Reason, not rituals. Got it. So how did he structure this secret network? Was it just, meetups in basements?
Far from it. Weishaupt was meticulous, almost obsessive about structure and organization. He set up this highly structured, hierarchical system. Think of it like a hidden philosophical school.
Layers.
Yes, distinct levels. You'd start as a novice. That involved careful vetting, checking your loyalty, your intelligence, making sure you really bought into the principles of reason and secularism.
It's pretty intense just to get your foot in the...
Well, necessary, right, if you're operating in secret against powerful forces. After novice came the Minerval stage.
Minerval, like Minerva, goddess of wisdom.
Exactly. This was the deeper dive. Real intellectual training philosophy, science, critical thinking. The aim was to properly educate the members, shape their minds according to Enlightenment ideals.
Shaping the thinkers who'd then go out and shape the world, presumably.
That was the plan. And the highest level was the illuminated Minerval. These were the inner circle, the trusted leaders. They were tasked with strategy, with actually advancing the order's influence.
And how do they keep it all secret?
Lots of techniques. Pseudonyms were crucial. Weishaupt himself went by Spartacus.
Spartacus, okay.
They used ciphers for letters, held clandestine meetings, and a key part of being a member was recruitment, carefully bringing in others who fit the profile. Educated, influential, and most importantly, aligned with the ideals.
Did this actually work? Did they manage to grow?
Surprisingly, yes,
Yeah.
quite rapidly for a secret group. By the early 1780s, just a few years after founding, estimates put their membership around 2,000 people.
2,000, that's not insignificant, especially if they're influential people.
Exactly. They weren't just anybody. We're talking prominent intellectuals, politicians, academics, mainly in Bavaria, but spreading into neighboring regions too.
Wow. Okay, 2,000 influential people operating in secret, pushing for pretty radical ideas like secularism and reason in a deeply conservative state. Yeah, you can see the conflict coming a mile off.
Absolutely. Their very existence was a response to the difficulty of promoting Enlightenment ideas openly. And their methods, the secrecy, the focus on influence, they reflected both the challenges they faced and their, well, pretty ambitious goals.
Okay, so that sets up the origins nicely. But here's the thing. It was a secret society shut down centuries ago.
Yeah.
How do we actually know so much detail about how they work? Which brings us to the documents, right? The ones the government sees.
Exactly. And this is where the story takes a really ironic twist. The main reason we have such a clear window into the historical Illuminati is because the Bavarian government, trying to destroy them in the 1780s, seized all their internal papers and then published them. They wanted to expose them, discredit them, paint them as this huge threat.
But in doing so, they basically created the primary source material for all future study.
Precisely. It's a perfect example of unintended consequences. They accidentally preserved the very thing they wanted to erase.
That's incredible. So what did these published documents reveal? What was in them?
Well, one key publication was the original Schriften des Illuminatorgondens, the original writings of the Order of Illuminati, published around 1787. These were the confiscated papers.
And they spilled the beans.
They laid out everything, the detailed structure, the ranks we just talked about, novice, Minerval, illuminated Minerval. They showed the methods for, well, managing members, ensuring secrecy, expanding the network. They even described the rituals and codes.
Ah, the rituals. Were they all spooky cloaks and chanting like in the movies?
Hey, well, they did adapt some elements from Freemasonry, which was common. But true to Weishaupt's focus, they deliberately stripped out the mystical stuff he disliked. The focus was really on oaths, strict oaths of loyalty and secrecy, and on reinforcing the order's core principles. Reason, Enlightenment ideals, not so much on, arcane spiritual quests.
More philosophical boot camp than a cult ceremony.
Kind of, yeah. And the documents clearly outline their philosophical aims, this gradual, almost educational reform of society. The idea was to reshape institutions from the inside out by placing members who would champion reason, education, secular thinking.
It sounds less like a plot for immediate world takeover and more like a long-term strategy for cultural and political change.
That's definitely how it reads in their own internal communications. And beyond the formal rules, you also have the seized letters, the correspondence between members, like between Weishaupt and another key figure, Baron von Nigg.
Like reading their private messages, what do those show?
They give you a much more human picture. You see the practicalities of recruitment, how they carefully targeted, educated, influential individuals who seemed receptive.
Okay.
But you also see the internal politics, the arguments. Nigg, for instance, was crucial for recruitment and expanding their reach, but he favored a slightly broader, maybe less rigidly controlled approach than Weishaupt, and that caused real friction between them. Weishaupt was very insistent on strict control.
Internal power struggles, even in a secret society. Makes sense.
Oh, yeah. And the letters really show the growing paranoia, too. Increased use of pseudonyms, encrypted messages. You can feel the pressure mounting as government scrutiny intensified.
I bet those coded messages looked incredibly suspicious to the authorities once they got their hands on them and decoded them.
They certainly provided plenty of ammunition for the government's narrative that this was a dangerous, subversive plot. And then, alongside the internal documents, you have Weishaupt's own published philosophical works, things like Philosophical Narration and Diogenes' Lamp. These weren't just internal memos, they were his public-facing arguments, his intellectual foundation.
So, laying out the philosophy that underpinned the whole order.
Exactly. Philosophical Narration spells out his core beliefs. Reason, education, rejecting superstition. He argued that traditional institutions, church, state, were actively keeping people ignorant to hold on to power. You see the big themes: rationalism, equality based on merit, secularism.
And Diogenes' lamp. That sounds intriguing.
That one was written after the suppression. It's basically his defense. He argues their true aims were misunderstood, paints the Illuminati as this force for good, challenging authoritarianism and religious orthodoxy for humanity's benefit. It's actually quite remarkable for its philosophical optimism, even though his whole project had just been dismantled.
So these documents, seized and published by the state that wanted them gone, they end up being the bedrock, the source material that cements their place in history, both the real history and providing the launch pad for all the myths.
Precisely. The government's attempt to condemn them backfired in that sense. It guaranteed their notoriety and gave future generations, historians, and conspiracy theorists plenty to work with.
Which flows perfectly into the next part of the story, the suppression. How did this group, which was apparently growing fast and had influential members, get shut down so effectively?
Well, that rapid growth and, crucially, the intense secrecy were exactly what attracted negative attention. Remember, Bavaria was deeply conservative, dominated by the Catholic Church and the monarchy. Secret societies were already viewed with suspicion.
And the Illuminati, with their radical Enlightenment ideas, must have seemed particularly threatening.
Exactly. They were seen as a direct challenge to the established order. The secrecy that was meant to protect them also made them seem inherently sinister to outsiders. It became their biggest liability in many ways.
Was there a specific tipping point?
A major one seems to have been their strategy of infiltrating Freemasonry. Freemasonry was more established, sometimes tolerated, sometimes not. But when Illuminati members, especially prominent ones, started joining Masonic lodges and trying to influence them from within...
That must have set off alarm bells, like they were trying to take over existing networks.
That's exactly how it was perceived. It fueled fears of a coordinated conspiracy, uniting potentially thousands of influential men under this single, radical, hidden agenda. It looked like a Trojan horse strategy.
Okay, so the authorities decide to act. What do they do?
Starting around 1784, the ruler of Bavaria, Elector Charles Theodore, began issuing edicts targeting secret societies in general. These became much more specific and intense in 1785, directly naming and targeting the Illuminati.
So, raids, arrests.
Yes. Raids on members' homes, arrests, and crucially, the confiscation of all those documents we just talked about. The government campaign was very deliberate, framed the Illuminati as dangerous radicals plotting to overthrow the monarchy and destroy the church.
Painting them as enemies of the state, basically.
Absolutely. And using their own seized documents, often taken out of context, as the proof. When works like the original writings were published in 1787, it exposed their inner workings, yes, but for many, it just confirmed the official narrative of a sinister plot. Seeing the coded messages, the talk of strategic influence, it looked bad.
So by 1785, the government had effectively cracked down. What happened to Weishaupt himself? Did he get arrested?
He actually managed to flee Bavaria just in time in 1785. He found refuge in Gotha under the protection of Duke Ernest II of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, who was much more sympathetic to Enlightenment ideas.
So he lived out his life in exile.
He did. He spent the rest of his life writing, trying to defend the order's reputation and clarify its aims. Those works we mentioned, philosophical narration, Diogenes' lamp, they come from this period. He argued relentlessly that their goals were misrepresented, that they wanted gradual, peaceful reform through reason and education, not violent revolution.
Trying to reclaim the narrative, but it sounds like the damage was done.
Yeah.
Did he just fade away?
Pretty much. He died in 1830, relatively obscure compared to the massive legend his creation would become. The suppression effectively dismantled the organization. It really highlighted that clash between progressive ideas and entrenched conservative power. And it showed how secrecy, while maybe necessary, was also a profound risk.
And, ironically, the very tools used to destroy the organization, the public exposure of its secrets, became the seeds for the myth.
Exactly. The end of the historical Illuminati laid the perfect groundwork for the birth of the Illuminati legend.
And this is really where things take a wild turn. How on earth did this specific short-lived group from 18th century Bavaria transform into this symbol of a timeless global conspiracy controlling everything?
It's an incredible case study in how fear, paranoia, and, frankly, imagination can warp history. The conspiracy theories didn't take long to appear. They started almost right after the suppression, late 18th, early 19th century.
Why then? What was going on?
Well, Europe was in turmoil. You had massive upheavals, most significantly the French Revolution. And many conservative thinkers, horrified by the chaos, were desperately looking for someone, some hidden hand, to blame.
And the Illuminati, this recently exposed secret society, critical of church and state, fit the bill.
Perfectly. They became a convenient scapegoat. It wasn't just vague fear, though. Specific writers really pushed this narrative.
Ah, so there are key figures popularizing the conspiracy.
Absolutely. Two stand out. First, a French Jesuit priest named Augustin Barruel. In his book, Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, from 1797, he argued that the French Revolution wasn't spontaneous, but was the result of a deliberate plot orchestrated by the Illuminati, working together with Freemasons and Enlightenment philosophers to destroy Christianity and monarchy.
Wow, that's a huge claim, blaming them for the entire French Revolution.
A massive claim, yeah. And almost simultaneously, you had a Scottish scientist, John Robison, publishing proofs of a conspiracy in 1798. He made similar arguments, specifically claiming the Illuminati had infiltrated Masonic lodges as part of a master plan to establish a secular world government.
So these two books, coming out right around the same time, basically cemented the idea of the Illuminati as this hidden force behind revolutionary chaos and link them firmly to Freemasonry in the public mind.
Precisely. That connection to Freemasonry was absolutely crucial for the myth's growth. Even though the historical Illuminati infiltration was limited and contested, linking them to the much larger, more widespread Masonic network allowed the conspiracy narrative to scale up dramatically. It wasn't just a Bavarian issue anymore, it could be global.
And over time, this just ballooned.
It did. The Illuminati label became detached from the actual history and turned into this free-floating symbol for any suspected hidden elite, pulling the strings, bankers, politicians, powerful families, you name it. It became a kind of shorthand for the secret people in charge.
And sometimes, sadly, mixing with older, uglier tropes.
Unfortunately, yes. While not always direct, the themes of a hidden, manipulative global elite sometimes intersected with or echoed anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, like those found in things like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, even if the Illuminati weren't the specific focus there. The structure of the fear was similar.
Okay, let's really pin this down. Based on the actual sources, what are the absolute key differences between the historical Illuminati and this massive myth? Let's make the contrast sharp.
Okay. Number one, absolutely fundamental. Global influence. The historical group. Limited. Mostly Bavaria, maybe some neighboring German states, late 18th century. That's it. The myth. Claims worldwide, century-spanning control. It's a complete fabrication of scale.
Right. Not just bigger, but fundamentally different in scope.
Totally. Second, their goals. Historically, we saw it in their writings. Intellectual and social reform through education, reason, subtle influence within existing structures. The myth. Sinister plots for total world domination, often involving chaos, control, maybe even occult practices.
Changing minds versus, conquering the planet. Very different aims.
Very different. Third, infiltration and control. The real Illuminati tried to place members strategically, yes, they sought influence. But the organization was shut down before they achieved anything close to controlling governments on any significant scale. The myth claims they successfully manipulate governments, economies, major world events.
So aspiration versus alleged total control.
Exactly. And finally, maybe the most obvious, linking them to modern events or even things like the French Revolution.
Right.
There is zero factual basis in the historical record connecting the actual Bavarian Illuminati, which ceased functioning in the 1780s, to any major events after their suppression. French Revolution, world wars, financial crises, 9/11, current politics. None of it holds up to historical scrutiny.
So the myth is essentially a different entity entirely. It just borrowed the name and a few superficial details from the historical group and used it as a vessel for all sorts of later fears and speculations.
That's a great way to put it. It's a vessel. And popular culture has been absolutely instrumental in keeping that vessel afloat and making it seem omnipresent.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Media seems to love the mythical Illuminati.
Absolutely. It's irresistible fodder. You've got literature, like the satirical Illuminatus, trilogy by Wilson and Shea, which played with all the conspiracy tropes.
Yeah.
Or much more mainstream, Dan Brown's Angels and Demons, which used a completely fictionalized Illuminati seeking revenge against the church as a major plot device. Millions read that.
And movies and TV are full of it, too.
Yeah.
Usually as the shadowy bad guys or the keepers of ancient secrets.
Exactly. Films like National Treasure or Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, they often feature some version of the Illuminati as this ancient, powerful, hidden force. Even comedy shows, The Simpsons, Family Guy, they make jokes about them, which is funny. But it also keeps the name and the core idea, powerful secret group, constantly circulating in pop culture.
And then there's the whole visual side. The symbols, the all-seeing eye, the pyramid getting attached to everything, especially music.
That's become a huge part of the modern myth, particularly online. Symbols that have complex histories, often linked to Freemasonry, general esoteric traditions, or even just graphic design trends, get flattened and presented as definitive Illuminati signs. Artists get accused based on album covers or music video imagery. It completely divorces these symbols from reality and forces them into the conspiracy narrative.
And the internet just poured gasoline on that fire.
Oh, exponentially. Social media allows these theories and the evidence supposedly supporting them to spread instantly, globally. And it often blurs the line completely between people who genuinely believe, people who are just sharing it, ironically, and those who are deliberately spreading disinformation. The mythical Illuminati thrives in that online ecosystem.
So overwhelmingly, the Illuminati you see in pop culture is pure fiction. It reflects our fascination, maybe our fear, of hidden power. And it shows how conspiracy theories can latch onto a historical name and twist it into something completely different to fit modern anxieties.
It's a really stark example of how a compelling narrative, even one with little basis in fact, can totally overwhelm the actual historical record in the public imagination.
Okay, let's shift focus back for a moment. Back to the man himself, Adam Weishaupt. If we put aside the myths and even the short, dramatic life of the order he founded, do his actual philosophical ideas have any lasting impact or relevance today?
Oh, absolutely. I think they do. Weishaupt was, at his core, a man of the Enlightenment. And his central ideals, things like reason, critical thinking, freeing thought from dogma, using education for social change, these were powerful then, and they remain incredibly relevant.
He really saw education as the key, didn't he?
Fundamentally, he believed that ignorance, often deliberately perpetuated by powerful institutions, was the main thing holding humanity back. So he advocated for rigorous education, especially in philosophy and science, to build critical thinking skills, independent judgment. An educated population for him was the foundation for a fair, just society.
And closely tied to that was freedom of thought.
Yes. The absolute necessity of questioning authority, challenging norms, thinking for yourself instead of just accepting dogma. And underpinning all of it was reason, using logic and evidence to overcome superstition, prejudice, making informed decisions.
These sound like classic Enlightenment values, but weren't some of his specific critiques quite radical for 18th century Bavaria?
They were, especially regarding organized religion and the state. He saw the Catholic Church, particularly its powerful role in Bavaria, as a major barrier to progress. He felt it actively kept people ignorant and unequal to maintain its own power.
Did he want to destroy religion, like the myths often claim?
His own writing suggests it's more complex. He was certainly critical, deeply critical, of the Church's institutional power and dogma, but it seems he aimed more for a fundamental reform of morality and society towards reason, rather than outright abolition of all religious belief. He wanted reason to guide morality.
And his views on authoritarian rule?
He saw it as inherently exploitative, resistant to change, a source of injustice. He strongly advocated for more transparency, more accountability in government ideas that put him on a direct collision course with the Bavarian elector, obviously.
And it's striking how many of those points, secularism, education, freedom of thought, challenging authority, still resonate so strongly today.
They really do. Think about it. His push for secular governance, the separation of church and state, that's a foundational principle in many modern democracies and is still fiercely debated elsewhere.
Right.
His emphasis on education driving progress, it aligns perfectly with modern efforts to expand access to quality education, promote critical thinking, especially vital now with misinformation being such a challenge.
And freedom of expression is constantly in the news.
Constantly. Central to debates about free speech, censorship, the media's role, and his critiques of concentrated, unaccountable power, they feel incredibly relevant watching the rise of authoritarian tendencies and challenges to democratic norms globally today. So while his chosen method, the secret society, might seem problematic or outdated, the core principles he championed have enduring importance.
How do the Illuminati's approach this secret hierarchical model compared to other Enlightenment movements happening at the same time? Were they outliers?
They shared the big goals, definitely reason, education, rights. But their methods were different, largely dictated by that hostile Bavarian environment. While other Enlightened figures used public debate, published widely, formed salons, the Illuminati chose secrecy and infiltration out of perceived necessity.
And the structure.
Their structure was quite hierarchical, quite controlled from the top by Weishaupt, which differed from some more egalitarian Enlightenment circles. And Weishaupt's critique of institutional religion was perhaps more pointed, more radical than many contemporaries who maybe sought more of a balance between faith and reason.
So, Similar destination, but a very different, perhaps riskier path chosen due to their specific circumstances.
Exactly. And despite the order's quick demise and the way its name got completely hijacked by myth, Weishaupt's underlying ideas, his critiques of unchecked power, his belief in reason and education, they still stand. They're a testament to the transformative potential he saw in critical thought, even if his own organization didn't survive.
This whole story, really, from the clandestine beginnings to the outlandish global myth, seems packed with lessons that feel very current.
It really is. I think one of the clearest lessons is about the dangers of secrecy and the mistrust it inherently breeds. For the historical Illuminati, yes, secrecy felt necessary for survival, but it absolutely fueled internal problems, and more importantly, it created this vacuum of knowledge externally that was easily filled with paranoia and fear. It made them the perfect target for suppression and later for conspiracy theories.
It's so easy to project your worst fears onto a group you can't see, whose motives you don't understand.
Exactly. It creates fertile ground for speculation. And that's hugely relevant today when you think about any institution. Governments, corporations, powerful groups that operate with a lack of transparency. It just underscores how vital accountability is. Without oversight, organizations are vulnerable to accusations, whether fair or not, and internal problems can fester.
It's that constant tension, isn't it, between legitimate needs for privacy or security and the openness that's required to build and maintain public trust.
It is, and the Illuminati story suggests that excessive secrecy in the long run can be incredibly damaging. It erodes trust, hinders collaboration, and as we saw, becomes a powerful tool for opponents and misinformation campaigns. Transparency and accountability aren't just buzzwords. History suggests they're crucial for legitimacy, and maybe even survival in a world awash with information and suspicion.
And Weishaupt's core struggle pushing for reason against dogma, for cancer against authoritarianism, feels very contemporary when we look at challenges like misinformation or rising authoritarianism today.
Absolutely. His critique of opaque, centralized power is incredibly relevant to analyzing regimes today that chip away at democratic norms or suppress dissent. And his relentless focus on education and critical thinking, it feels more urgent than ever. In an era of fake news, social media echo chambers, deep fakes, the ability to critically evaluate information, what we now call media literacy, is precisely the kind of empowered reasoning Weishaupt advocated for to resist manipulation.
And the ongoing debates about the role of religion in public life.
Still relevant. The principle of secular governance, ensuring policy is driven by evidence and reason rather than religious doctrine, remains a key issue in many societies. Studying the Illuminati provides historical context for these long-running struggles over the place of reason in governance.
What about the bigger picture? What does the Illuminati story teach us about studying secret societies in general?
Well, it highlights that double-edged sword of secrecy again. It can protect dissent, but it makes groups vulnerable. It forces us to ask, when, if ever, is organizational secrecy justified? But maybe more profoundly, it shows the incredible power of myth and misrepresentation.
How the idea of a group can become more influential than the group itself ever was.
Exactly. The perceived influence, driven by fear and speculation, can vastly eclipse the actual historical impact. This isn't unique to the Illuminati. You see similar patterns with groups like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, others throughout history rumored to hold hidden power. Studying these myths tells us as much about the anxieties of the societies that produce them as it does about the groups themselves.
So the Illuminati myth isn't just a historical curiosity. It's like a mirror, reflecting our own ongoing fears about hidden control, about a world that feels too complex to easily understand.
Precisely. And for any modern group aiming for change, the Illuminati's history offers lessons, cautionary tales about secrecy, yes, but also insights into the enduring power of ideas, the need for strategy, and perhaps, critically in our time, the absolute necessity of transparency and accountability if you want to build lasting trust and make a real impact.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this whole journey. The historical Illuminati, a specific, relatively small, short-lived Enlightenment group, founded by Adam Weishaupt, 1776, Bavaria. Goal: promote reason, reform society through a secret network. We know this primarily from documents seized and published by the very government that shut them down.
Right, and that historical reality stands in stark contrast to the myth. This idea of a shattery, all-powerful, ancient global conspiracy pulling the strings behind everything. That myth emerged shortly after their suppression, fueled by revolutionary fears, specific writers like Berulle and Robeson, and then just amplified endlessly by speculation, media, and culture over the centuries.
And the crucial takeaway really is understanding that difference. separating the historical fact based on the documents, on Weishaupt's own writings from the conspiracy fiction, which is largely a projection of anxieties onto a convenient historical name. The myth is powerful, yes, but the real story tells us something important about the struggles of the Enlightenment and the enduring power of certain ideas.
Yeah, the myth has definitely overshadowed the reality for most people, but understanding the real group gives us valuable insights.
And that lasting fascination with the myth, it says so much about us, doesn't it? That fear of the unknown, the suspicion that there must be hidden hands controlling things, that desire for explanations, even if they're conspiratorial, for a world that often feels chaotic and complex. It taps into a deep human need to understand power.
And the myth is flexible. It adapts. It attaches itself to whatever the current anxieties are, from 18th century revolutions to 21st century global finance or celebrity culture. It keeps finding new relevance in fear.
So thinking about this whole arc, from the secretive reality to the sprawling myth, really leaves us with a final crucial question, something for you listening to think about. In our own world, today, which is so hyper-connected, so saturated with information, and let's be honest, misinformation, with our own complex power structures, our own echo chambers, how do we make sure that we prioritize transparency, critical thinking, and reason? How do we focus on understanding the real forces shaping our society, rather than getting lost in those compelling but ultimately fictional shadows of conspiracy? What's your role in seeking out, evaluating, and holding on to factual understanding?